Well, hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us for this webinar today. Uh, and you carved out some time on the opening day of March Madness. So we gotta give you extra props for that.
Yeah.
Um, thrilled to have you guys with us. I am Matt Johnson. I'm lead pastor at Journey Church in Murray, Kentucky, which is in the far western tip of the state. We started our church back in 2005, and I get to help with the ICN Church Planner Coaching Program. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. But we're talking today about fundraising. And fundraising is certainly a massive challenge for church planters. We all know that. We went through it. It's a challenge on the front end to fund it enough to get the church started. It's a challenge once you get it started to sustain it in the early years. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about it. And I've got a couple guys here with me that I think are going to be really helpful. Jeff Fuchs. Jeff is Dr. Jeff Fuchs, if I want to be specific. Jeff is the pastor out at Blunt Community Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. Jeff started his church in 2006, and he is a coach in our church planner coaching program. And we also have Chris Madden here. So Chris is also a participant in our program. Chris is in Bangor, Maine, and he's going to be launching a church in the fall. So Chris is living this in real time. If any of you are in that stage or season, Chris knows exactly what you're feeling. I'm going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes asking them a few questions, getting their thoughts on what they're experiencing and what they're going through. And then we're going to do some Q&A time. So if you've got questions, anything you want to know about this, anything they say that sparks a question for you, just drop it in the chat. Our buddy Louie is there in the chat. He's interacting with some of you, and he'll be watching those questions. We'll be sure to get to as many of them as we can over the next 45 minutes or so. So let me start with Chris, because as I said, Chris, you're right in the middle of this right now, fundraising, figuring out how to raise money and invite people to fund something that doesn't even exist yet. That is a massive challenge. You feel that tension right now. You've got that you're trying to figure out on your own. But just tell me, what are some of the tensions you feel? What are some of the pressure points you're feeling as you're figuring out how to raise funds?
Yeah, we're launching probably this fall, September actually, and so we've been thinking about funding for a while now. And I'd say one of the biggest tensions is just managing the time of building the launch team versus building all the funds that we need. They're both probably full-time jobs in and of themselves, and trying to make sure I have enough time for both is challenging for sure. The other tension I think of is raising enough money both to get the church off the ground, our launch budget, but then also thinking about how are we going to fund it once we get rolling, because we're going to want at least some of that money before we start. So those are two of the tensions for sure.
Yeah, though you said it best, Chris. Building a launch team and raising funds, it does feel like two full-time jobs for sure. That's part of what makes it challenging. Jeff, I want to come to you because you've done a lot of this. You did it on the front end when you launched your church. You're in the middle of a generosity initiative at your church now. I mean, it's never stopped. And you've helped a lot of church planners over the years. Talk to me a little bit about how you would advise a church planter to think about developing funding for their new church and any first steps you'd recommend.
Well, I want to say thanks to all the people that came and joined us. First of all, that's exciting. We like to be around people who are interested in church planning, and so thanks for joining us. With the funding, that's always the biggest part. And the most pressure a planter is going to feel is getting the money to start the launch budget. So the first thing that hits them in the face is going to be the launch budget. And that's honestly the easiest piece because it's pretty clear you need a certain amount of money to launch and that. But you also need a first year budget. So this needs to be perceived as a multifaceted approach and not just one, because you can tackle that first one and then it'll be soon that it comes, you're like, oh crap, we've got a whole year that we got to maintain this. And some planners even go so far as to do both of those budgets. but it gets more layered because you also have to have some kind of generosity training. So you have to, Chris mentioned the launch team. We have to continually train the people that are a part of our launch to be giving. But not only that, if we're an outward facing church, the people that we're reaching, we have to start learning how to develop them, and we have to have donor systems. So you've got a launch, you got the first year, you've got generosity training, and you got donor systems. So it's more complex than just raising some money, and it creates tension, and leaders have to have not just a plan, but a multifaceted plan to start well.
Okay, Jeff, I want to follow up on that for just a second. You talk about leadership and the importance of it in this whole
Yeah.
process. It's sounding like you feel like this really rises and falls. It's make or break on the quality of the leadership we provide as we go through this.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And we want to hit leadership as it pertains specifically to funding in this, because there's a lot of great stuff with leadership. But it not only makes or breaks funding, it makes or breaks the beginning of a church, a planner, a launcher, whatever. And here's the interesting thing. And we know this, you and I, we have never met a church planner who didn't have confidence in their leadership coming in. They have the answers, they have a plan, and yet most of the time it's not good enough. A famous boxer once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that is so true with planners, that they will feel punched if they have a plan. They don't know, because we didn't know when we were doing it. You will get punched in the face or punched in the stomach. You will feel like deflated. That will come, and that will influence how you lead. And specifically with leadership, Matt, one of the things that we can tell with planners is their approach to asking for funding. Do they have this pity approach, or do they have a vision driven approach? A pity approach is, man, I'm trying to start this church, and if I can get some money so that I can continue eating and feeding my family, I love to get some decent sound equipment. If we can get somebody, if you'd give some money, then we're going to be able to buy a microphone. And wow, maybe this week we'll have communion because we can, versus God has given me this great vision. But we see that people are, because it's tough, because you're trying to save it. But as a leadership part in vision casting, funding will be challenge your vision. You will feel like you have been deflated. It shouldn't, but it does. But funding will challenge your vision, and your leadership will come out strong in this area.
All right, let's drill down, Jeff, into some nuts and bolts here for a second. You bring up vision. So this, I mentioned it earlier, this really is a challenge. On the front end, you are inviting people to give to something that doesn't even exist yet.
It's not
And
there.
and in most cases, they don't know whether it's going to exist and whether it's going to be around 5 years from now. 80% of church plants close within the first 5 years.
Right.
So this vision piece is really important. Let's drill down, give us some practical tips on what it looks like to share or cast a compelling vision to people when you're inviting them to invest in this.
Yeah. And for church planners, a lot of people will say they couldn't do something because of the funding. Funding is what killed it, or I didn't have enough money to do that. And we don't think that's the case. We think that is a manifestation. You can go, and part of that is vision. People will give to vision more than they will give to need. And again, a young church planner, or even an older church planner starting a church, the vision that they cast, if it's not compelling, and again, there's a lot of great stuff about vision, but the big thing when it comes to fundraising is just the lead pastor, just the founding pastor, or whoever's launching it. It's not enough for that person to have a compelling vision. They have to get people to want to join and to be part owners in that. They have to pray about it. It's more than just the lead pastor having a good vision. That is not enough. They have to get feedback from outside voices. Again, we've never met a church planner that didn't think they were a great leader. Leaders think they can cast vision. we have heard people cast vision and we're like, whoa, they probably have it in there somewhere, but they need to be a part of some kind of team or have some kind of feedback or relationships. Because if it's not clear and if it's not compelling and something that other people are going to own, are other people owning it? Who's helping you develop that vision, especially when it comes, because that's going to determine your funding.
No, you're spot on there. And you mentioned we've seen a lot of people cast vision. You can tell when someone is casting a vision that they own personally
Yeah.
and believe in or invested in, and when they don't. And
Right.
that's a key piece of it as you're casting it. They've got to see the passion in you and in me and know these people are all in on this. They're investing their life in it. Chris, I want to circle back to you real quick. So for those of you who are joining us on the webinar, Jeff is actually Chris's coach in our coaching program. So they have calls every single month. So Chris, Jeff's been helping you figure this out. You've got some other voices who's who are leaning in, helping you figure it out. Talk to us for just a minute about how that has helped you navigate this tension you mentioned at the beginning. What kind of plan are you developing? How are you approaching this as a result?
Yeah, it's been great having Jeff as a coach. Whenever I have any questions about what to do next, I've got somebody who's done this before, who's had experience with it, and not just him. Some other coaches we get on a call with once a month additionally, to talk through things, along with some other planters. And having all of them to kind of watch what they do and see the mistakes that they make and some of the successes they have. I can copy what they do right and don't do what they do wrong, and learn a lot that way. But having Jeff's feedback has been invaluable, because when you build anything, there's all kinds of decisions that need to be made. I'm currently in the process of building my own house and we're almost done. There's just so many decisions in the final stage. I kind of wish I had a coach for building my house so they could tell me all the things that I could be doing wrong and, the traps I could be falling into. But oftentimes I found myself going, I'm not sure what the best decision is. And I can bring that to Jeff and he can give me some feedback on some things that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Few of the things that I've been doing, because of all the things I've learned from Jeff and the rest of the coaches. The first thing is from the very beginning, I knew I was going to be doing, or I knew I might be doing this about 2 years before the launch day was going to be. And so I started setting aside money then, and I've continued to do that. And after 2 years of setting aside money, that adds up, to a lot more than the little amount we might be able to do in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So I obviously recommend that to anyone who's going to be trying to fundraise is start setting aside money as early as you can because it adds up. And also you're setting the example to all the other givers in your church. Second thing, make giving a part of the launch team. My son was talking to me the other day and told me, I think more people would join the launch team, Dad, if we didn't ask them to give. And I explained to him, like, yeah, that could possibly be true, but we're looking for people to help get the church off the ground. So that's a piece of the puzzle. We're asking people to give something on a regular basis. It's going to be different for every person, but and then the final thing is just creating that budget, both for the launch and for the first year. And I actually just sent that to Jeff last week, the launch for the first year budget. And I'm sure he's going to take a look at it and give me some feedback on what I should be adding to it, maybe, and maybe some things I'm spending too much on. So,
Yeah.
Well, that's really helpful, Chris. And I want to highlight what you said about asking the launch team to invest financially. Because I think a lot of planters, our tendency is to think short term. All we're thinking about, it's kind of like the couple who's engaged and all they're thinking about is the wedding and they forget there's a marriage that's supposed to go on for decades after the wedding. A lot of us as planters get so fixated on just getting launched on opening Sunday that we forget, no, 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 we're trying to build a church that is a movement that's going to make an impact for decades. And so by you looking at that launch team saying, hey, if you want to be a part of getting this off the ground and helping us create this, we want you to invest financially. You're setting an anchor from the very beginning that generosity is a part of our culture, which is going to pay off years down the road versus the easier approach, which your son is so smart to see, which is, hey, just let anybody on the launch team. We need breathing bodies at the moment, right? But it'll pay off for you in the long run, even though it's harder now. Jeff, I want to segue back to you.
Hang on, Matt.
Yeah.
Because you just highlighted the difference between part of the difference between our model and our approach. In addition to it being outward facing, we take the approach of launching large and not planting small. And launching large requires more money. Somebody that was a mentor to us talked about you don't have a big crowd when you plant a seed in the ground and say, hey, everybody come over here. I planted this seed and I water it. It's slow. We want to go further, faster. We want to break some of those growth barriers in the beginning. It takes more effort and energy. It's a launching. We had the opportunity and he said, hey, we went outside and we watched the space shuttle launch. Took more time. It took more money. There was more at stake, our reputation. But launching large is part of our model to go further, faster. So you kind of highlighted that, but that's a distinction that we hold.
For sure. And I wanna ask you about some nuts and bolts fundraising practices. You guys, one of the things we're gonna do on this webinar is we wanna create space for y'all to ask the questions you want to know. So we're not trying to cover everything in it in a presentation format. Feel free to drop those questions in the chat. But Jeff, a couple more questions for you before we do that. When it comes to the nuts and bolts aspect of fundraising, what do you feel like is different today about how to raise funds versus previous generations of church starts? And then talk a little bit about what approach you see that's most effective, some practices that would be helpful for these church planners to consider as they're trying to raise funds.
Yeah. There's no shortcut when it comes to raising funds. And so that would be a big one. I don't know our audience. I don't know their age group but what used to work doesn't. Large gatherings no longer work like they used to. Sending a letter to a bunch of people and having 50 or 70 people in a room, that is not effective any longer. What works now is going to a more personal approach. And lackadaisical doesn't work. Again, I don't know our audience, but I'm thinking when an athlete goes from high school to college, many of them will say, I didn't know what they meant by working hard. I worked hard when I was in high school. And so it's not that somebody's necessarily lazy, but they may be, but they didn't know. And then when they get into another realm in college, then they're like, wow, I've taught how to practice hard. I've taught. So large gatherings, this broad brush approach, a personal approach works. And if you're going to do that, it takes work. It takes a plan. It takes coffee and dinners. And it always beats an event approach. So personal is always going to be some of the creative things that I've done with raising funds, because I didn't have a real good plan. I mean, we know obviously more now than what we did, but I wasn't lazy, so I worked hard at it. But there are some creative things that everybody has the leverage to be able to do. And when I started brainstorming names, one of my friends who I asked to support is a Chick-fil-A owner here in town. And so once you get him, and I was like, hey, Frankie, I want to cast vision, ask for money regularly. And then I said, Frankie, do you know anybody else that you could help me get in front of that might be willing to? I just want to, and he knows me. And lo and behold, he said, Jeff, I have a great friend that has an office in the Chick-fil-A corporate office in Atlanta. And it is 3 doors down from, I think it was Dan Cathy. And he said, if you want me to get this plan, your thing in front of Dan Cathy. And I was like, oh my goodness, heck yeah. I mean, who does that? And so that's what I did. I made one just for him and prayed. But that is just a door that opened. There's a pharmacy in our town. By the way, I got zero money from any of the Cathys for the launch, but it was exciting. I thought I might. A guy owns a pharmacy in town, and it's a smaller thing, but they do 500 to 1,000 prescriptions every day. And so I called him up and asked him to give, and he was actually part of the launch team. And I said, Aaron, would you be willing to put this card when you stuff your drugs in the bags? What does that have to do with fundraising? So for about a month, I had almost every day 500 to 1,000 invitations. I would get them to come to a small group gathering. And like Chris said, we're believers in a launch team. You got to have one of those. We expect our launch team people to give. If they want to help launch a church, it costs something. So you can be a part of the launch team. If his son is also right, it's easier. If you just want to be an attender and come and check it out, that's okay, but you're not helping us launch it. So that definition, making sure that people are clear that, hey, a launch team member is going to be giving, but there's always something creative that you can do in your environment that you have leverage to raise funds.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the money. The personal approach is always the most effective. It
Always.
takes longer, it's harder,
Yep.
but it's the way to go. Okay, I want to get to the questions, Jeff, but any final advice or thoughts, anything you hadn't shared with us before we get to the questions?
If someone is here and they're going to launch a church, they are responsible for the fundraising. The lead pastor, when you had a job before we were told, we had pretty much our job description dictated what we were supposed to do. When one of the exciting things about launching a church is you have this blackboard that's wiped clean. And so you have a lot of freedom. That's also very scary. But the lead pastor, the founding pastor, whoever's launching this church, is the one who is responsible to do it. They can't depend on anybody else, and they can't miss on this.
Oh, that's good. All right, we're going to get to your questions. You can keep dropping them in the chat. I want to highlight two things for you to make sure you don't miss it, and then we'll start with questions. One is we have another webinar coming up on April the 24th at 2:30 Eastern Time. We're going to be talking with another veteran church planner and some more in the trenches at the moment church planners. We're going to talk about digital strategies to help you build momentum before launch. The social media, YouTube, the digital environment in which we now live, it's an incredible opportunity that previous generations didn't have to build momentum, to begin to help people connect with your church. We'll talk through some of the best practices of how we're seeing church planners utilize that. I think you'll find that to be interesting and really, really practical. So feel free to, get an email about that, but feel free to register for that and join us for that. And the other thing I wanted to tell you real quickly, if you're interested in learning more about it, so ICN has a church planter coaching program. You've heard us reference that. Jeff and Chris are both a part of that. Jeff is a coach and Chris is a church planter. It is a 3-year coaching program where we walk you through everything that you need to know and do to launch large, to launch in a healthy way. And then we spend the next 2 years walking through the first 2 years of your church's existence, making sure it gets off to a great start. This is very nuts and bolts. It's extremely practical. You're in a cohort with a group of church planters. You also have a coach that you do a one-on-one call with every single month. You have access to them. So it is a support network that, quite honestly, part of the reason Jeff and I are a part of it is because we wished we would have had it when we started our churches. So we built something that we wish somebody had given us. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to irresistible.church/church-plant, and you can learn more about it. If you're interested in having a conversation, you can let us know. All right, let's get to some questions, Jeff and Chris. First question. How many people would you say need to be committed to giving for a healthy first year budget? In other words, how do you know, okay, we're ready to pull the trigger, we're not going to run out of money in year one?
Chris, I'd like to know what you think because you're getting ready to do it. How much do you need?
That's a good question. How much do you need at a bare minimum, or how much would you like to have ideally? Are two different questions, I think.
Yeah.
I've been a part of a couple of church launches before, one from the very beginning. And I know from that experience, we had probably about 30 regular givers when we launched. And I'll say that wasn't enough to pay our pastor full time when we launched. he went to part-time pretty quick, and then we had to wait a little bit before he went full-time. So I would guess you'd need a little more than that in order to pay all the bills. But it also depends on, I mean, we had a regular monthly lease that we were paying. We weren't renting and doing church in a box. So we had a little bit more expenses that way. So it depends on exactly your situation.
Yeah. And Matt, I'll let you hit some of the benchmarks because we've actually created that as part of our program. But I see that we have people from other countries in different places. When I launched with 50 people, and that included children and adults. And our launch budget was 50 something thousand dollars, but that was almost 20 years ago. So the money part, I almost think you need to work backwards and say, okay, you have to accomplish some things. You got to have certain equipment. You got to know what your rent is. You got to know what your salaries are. And so I would not arbitrarily set a budget. Go with, okay, I've got to have these things. I got to pay these people. These are going to be my bills. This is what we have to purchase to do the church the way we're going to do it in our style, and then work backwards from there, because we have churches that are in bigger communities and some that are in really small communities. And there's a difference between what is needed to do a good job. But we did create benchmarks, Matt, for that.
Yeah, for sure. This is why that first year budget, developing that before you ever launch, is so important. So I would suggest there are a lot of factors that go into this that can influence it. Here's the general principle. I would suggest that you ask yourself, what percentage of that first year budget do I want to know is going to come in before we launch? In other words, how much of a commitment from your launch team do you have that you can go, we can count on that amount of money coming in for the first year? And then decide how much of your first year budget needs to be covered from that. So for instance, a good benchmark might be 50%. All right, we know, or 25%. It depends on your context. But to go, okay, I'll just use 50. To go, hey, we know we're going to have 50% of our first year budget coming in because it's already committed, and we're seeing that money through our launch team's generosity now. Which means when we launch, we're counting on the new people who show up to fund the other 50% of year one. Now that gives you, to Chris's point, that lets you sleep better at night. If you have chosen a percentage that you go, okay, we know we have this, so now we have defined what gap we want to have that we feel like God will help us grow and cover over the course of the year. I would think of it that way, and you can define that based on what you want, but if you can get to 50%, you're in a really, really healthy place. 50% has been committed from your launch team before you ever go into opening Sunday. Related to that, Jeff, one of the questions was, what are the major pieces of the budget we should be thinking about during the first year? You want to rattle off a few of those things?
No, you got to have a location, and that location is going to cost you money. You have to have equipment. You have to have children's programming. You have to have, besides the lead pastor, the two people that we paid in the beginning was the pastor and a worship leader. So you got to have, so when we start off, we don't start off and we say we are the mission. We're not doing missions the first year. We're not doing small groups the first year. We're not doing student ministry the first year. And we can talk about that and go back and forth. But on the launch, it is about the Sunday, and the Sunday is a great worship experience and great children's programming. It's not all that other stuff. You may think you can do a great job with everything, but you will not be able to do a great job with everything. Worship programming and children's ministry, family ministry. So I think in those terms.
Yeah, that's good. You can break it up into, if you want to put it in buckets, your location, whether you've got to have an office location or not, any utilities that you're going to pay, insurance you're going to have to carry. You got to think about all that stuff. All that is under a bucket we call ministry services. And then you have your service programming or your worship programming, what happens for adults on Sundays. You got your family ministry programming for kids. And then that's probably going to be the bulk of your budget other than HR cost, payroll expenses in year one. So that gives you a framework to start thinking it through. Next question, and this probably came off of Chris's comment. So Chris mentioned that he started 2 years out knowing he was going to start a church, which I think is really, really wise. The question is, what's a general minimum timeline to prepare to launch large? So shortest amount of time, Jeff, shortest amount of time they can take and get ready and still get off to a healthy start.
Yeah. So I started going public talking about the church in January of 2005, and we held our first preview services in September of 2005. So that's 9-ish months. And like Chris was doing that before he and I had a relationship. But like Chris, my wife and I and our family began preparing because I was going from a average full-time salary to not.
Yeah.
So we were cutting back on things and making plans, but we did it in 9 months. I think our ideal is a year. If we've got a good leader, we can help them and they can be in great shape in one year.
Yeah, in our coaching program, we have different timelines that church planners are on, but we would say the ideal one would be 12 months out.
Yeah.
Next question. Uh, how do you identify and cultivate partnerships with individuals, organizations, or churches that are passionate about church planning? So, in other words, how do you find these people and then build some relationships?
Yeah. So it's funny because your funding and my funding were pretty different at the beginning, where most of mine was from individuals on the launch team, and much of yours was from organizations on the outside. So with the individuals, I like the question because it was asked with people who are passionate about church planning. If you give me somebody that's passionate about church planning, I'll get some money from them. I mean, so that is great right there. You give me some time with a great vision, and I will get them to commit to doing something because it's not about an individual. I seen one question in there about growing a church and community change. We think that planning churches is the means to the end for life change, for reaching the world, for the mission of Christ. So there's no better way for us. We're not just focused on a big church. We're focused on a healthy church, and a healthy church is outward focused and it's making life changes in other people. That's part of the vision. And if somebody has that and they realize, man, church planting is part of that, that's how you achieve it, then I'm having coffee with them. You can't shortcut that. Let me look into their eyes and share. And as far as organizations, you know better than I because I had no organizations, not a denomination or anything like that, that helped regularly.
Yeah, so I'll take the other side of that, but here's the common thread through it all. It's what Jeff just said. It's all about vision. It's all about, can you articulate clearly why this community, your community, needs a church like you're planting? And if you can communicate the need to people and show that you are creating a church that's a solution to meet that need, you will attract, just by virtue of that vision, the people who care about seeing that need met. So what I did is we had a little bit from individuals. Most of it was churches and organizations. And this was going back to Jeff's approach. I was boots on the ground, reaching out to every pastor I had a relationship with, saying, hey, I think God's calling me to do this, and casting a vision for it, and saying, is this something that you and your church would have any interest in investing in and helping make happen? And I will tell you, you're going to get 99 no's, quite possibly, for every one yes. I mean, I got a long list of no's before I ever got to a yes, but it got my communication skills better. I was able to hone those in terms of casting the vision. And eventually I found some churches and some pastors who had that passion. And the encouragement I would give is, it doesn't matter how many no's you get. It only takes one or two yeses with people who have a passion for it, and they'll come in big and help you in some tremendous ways potentially. Same for organizations. The big difference, well, I think this is true for churches and organizations. The thing I would caution you to pay attention to, do their values align with yours? And are they going to give you freedom to take the approach that you feel God is calling you to take? So I walked away from money when I thought they were going to be tying one hand behind my back where we couldn't do church the way God was calling us to do it. Their approach wasn't wrong, but I wanted the freedom to do what God was calling me to do. And if that meant not taking money from them, I was willing to do it. I didn't want to, we had some sister churches who partnered up with us, one for 3 years and one for 5 years. We didn't ask them to go that long, they just did. That was tremendous. I was just making sure you understand what I'm trying to do, and you're not going to get in the middle of telling us how we do church, or how we're creating this. As long as they're giving you the freedom to do that, then it can be a tremendous partnership. But it all comes back to the vision.
And oftentimes money from organizations is given with strings attached. So you got to be careful with that.
All right, Jeff, classic question here. This is definitely a tension. How do you balance monthly giving versus the one-time gifts that you get that come in, as far as forecasting and knowing when you can step out with a launch? So you get these people who are like, man, I believe in you, or I'm excited about what you're doing. They make a one-time gift. Some of them could be, sizable for you. And then you have these people who are practicing percentage giving or consistent giving, and they're doing it on a regular basis. So how would you navigate that as you're forecasting, hey, it's time to pull the trigger?
Yeah. There's not an easy answer to that because you can only depend on what you know is coming in regularly. To help with that, to have a little bit more security for me, I asked our launch team not only to tithe, but I wanted to know how much they were going to tithe so that I could plan. Hey, Matt, man, I know you're all in and I don't really care about how much you make, but you're a business person and I've got to create a budget for this next year. Depending on who the one-time giver was, we're always thankful. But if you want to err on caution, you divide that up through your year. I mean, that doesn't take faith, but it's not necessarily wrong. But you can't count on money that you don't know that's going to be there. If it's a healthy church and it's launched well, we know that the giving is going to grow. So if you just do a budget based on what you have right then, that requires no faith. So I was pretty cautious, but there's not a silver bullet magic answer to, oh yeah, what do you do when you don't know if they're going to give again?
Yeah, Jeff, and that's a good distinction because we're sitting here talking about what we feel like we have some control over, but church planning, like anything else, you're walking by faith and not by sight. So,
Yep.
so the understanding that we have is we're being good stewards of what we have and trying to lead well, but we're praying and trusting God and following His Spirit and trying to listen to what He has to say. You will never, it'll never, in our experience, all add up on paper before you start. You just have to, you want to walk by faith. You don't want to be foolish. And as long as you know that, okay, I haven't stepped across into the foolish category, then you're good to go for sure.
Because you have confidence. If you have a healthy, lean budget and you can have confidence in it, then that's going to come across to other people.
Okay. Next question, Jeff. This is one that, and Chris, you may want to weigh in on this one because you're living it right now. When it comes to building a launch team and church planting, how would you distinguish between people that are unchurched, but they're exploring faith, and people that are already Christian and just looking for a new church? So you get both of these groups of people who may be saying they want to be a part, and I don't have the context for this question, but let's say they're saying they want to be a part of your launch team, or they start coming in the early days. Those two groups of people are coming with two different sets of expectations at times. Jeff, lean in first. How did you navigate that? And I mean, we still navigate it in our churches. So give me any thoughts you have on that, and Chris can weigh in as well.
My first thought, and I don't mean to be rude, but I don't care about that. Our launch team qualities and expectations were what they were. I don't, at this point, it doesn't matter where their faith is. If somebody hasn't made a commitment to follow God. If it's a church person, sometimes I would rather have somebody that wasn't a church person. Sometimes people who are not, I'm in the Bible Belt church people, they gave more money than some of the people that said that they were Christians. So as far as my expectations in a launch team person, it didn't matter where they fit. They could be a part of that. Now, I'm not going to let somebody that's not a Christian be in an area of influence that is going to, risk something. But as far as doing what we needed, hey, we need greeters and we need people to run the sound and we need people to do this and we need givers and you need to be here and we need you to be friendly. That I don't care who where their faith was. Once we started going, that becomes more obvious. My goal for everyone is to take faith steps. At this point, I didn't have to evaluate where they were at in their faith journey. And the heart for somebody that wants to take a faith step is usually pretty similar. If it's someone for the first time that's praying for repentance and following Jesus, or somebody that needs to, in our area, it's called rededication. If they want to rededicate, the prayer is the same. If I've got a person that they have a relationship and they've fallen away, their heart is the same. I want to do whatever God wants me to do. So that didn't come into play for me that much because I had clarity on the front end and had a plan.
Yeah, no, that's good. Chris, anything you want to add to that as you're navigating this right now?
Yeah, right now we have some people who are longtime Christians, and we have some people who I'm pretty sure are not Christians. We're still kind of getting to know them, but just through conversations, it doesn't sound like they are, which is great. I'm happy to have both. Um, yeah, there's not a whole lot I want to add besides that. I agree, we need both.
Well, and I think, Chris, one of the things you're doing a great job of is communicating a very clear vision of the kind of church you're creating. The one thing that I see trips up church planners sometimes, um, you will be speaking the same language as people who come from other churches, but you do not mean the same thing with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand anybody who's coming from a church background, they are they're coming in with certain thoughts about how church should operate.
Yeah.
And not always, but in some cases, they're coming because they didn't like the way the last church operated. And so you have to be very clear in here's who we are, here's who we're going to be, here's who we're focused on, here's how we're going to go about this. And just know that not all of those church folks may stick because it may not match up. What they think you're doing and what they actually see you do, it's common once you actually start meeting for certain church people on your launch team to go, oh, wait, I didn't think that's what this meant. And they'll come to you and tell you it needs to be done differently. And you'll be like, that's completely off vision and mission. And at that point, they'll exit out. That happens sometimes, even with the best vision clearly communicated. So just be aware of that and don't let that sidetrack you at all. And Chris, as you're navigating through this, you're doing a really good job of that. And yet still, that'll probably happen to you at some point along the way. Okay, last question. Jeff, I'll give this one to you and we'll wrap up. What kind of a long-term impact are you hoping to see through your support of church planning? And I assume this is in the coaching program. So just any thoughts you have on long-term, what we hope to see happen with these church planners and these church plants as we're coaching and supporting them.
That's a great question. We got into this because we believe that church planning is a way to be on mission for the gospel. That is what's going to change the world, and we're old enough now to pick and choose what we decide to do with our time. So, our partnership with ICN is such that we think that this could be part of the biggest impact that we can make, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world. So my goal was never to have a big church that, and in fact, that's not a great vision. If you say, man, my goal is to have a big church, what will fuel most genuine church planners is when they see people's lives changed. And so that's what fuels me. So we've got this big vision, but it's these little bitty pieces that are really what that vision is. So for me, it is what I want to invest my life in. Not just so, we're balancing, we're leading a local church, but we're also a part of this church planning initiative. And we're fortunate enough that we get to do it with ICN, which just kind of throws fuel on the fire with each other. So for me, it's a world changing type of thing, where I'm at and wherever God allows us to be a part of not building big churches, but being a part of starting new churches that are going to spread God's word in an outward facing way and change lives.
Yeah, we just want to make it simple for people to connect with Jesus and take their next steps to follow him. And so our focus is on helping church planners create the kind of churches that people not in church love to experience as much as those of us who are church people, and help all of those people take their next step in terms of following Jesus. That is the goal. It's not a number. It's about a healthy church that's helping people experience Jesus' grace. And we're excited that you guys are involved in church planning in some capacity. Appreciate you giving your time today to lean in. Hope you found this helpful. I'll remind you again, digital strategies to build momentum before launch. The next webinar is going to be April 24th, 2:30 Eastern time. Andy McQuaid from Lake Oconee Church. He's a coach in our program. He'll be with us along with a church planner. And then if you want to learn more about the church planner program, if you got questions about that, go to irresistible.church/church-plant, and you can find all of the information there. Thank you guys for being with us. Y'all enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thanks.